I know.
Same.
Have you seen all those jokes about 4:30 in Montana?
No.
Oh, okay. One of them I have to sing you, but I got to think about it for a minute. If the moon hits your eye and it's 4:35, it's Montana.
Truth. Makes me want to get in my PJs and relax. Mhm.
Word. Right.
Okay. Shh.
Hi, Dave and Carson.
Hey, Stephanie.
How's it going?
Going well.
Good.
Real well. How are you guys?
We're cooking over here. We're doing good.
Cool.
Bounce back week.
Yeah. Hasn't it been one?
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Let me share my screen here. We are recording. That's good. This is going to be the recording that hopefully we can get around to some folks, and we're going to be doing a couple of these kind of rollout meetings. So these will be valuable. I'll try to make sure that I zoom in on things so everybody can see what the slides say and all that. Let's see here. BRCD housing stakeholder session. All right, what are we missing? A couple more folks tuning in.
I have no idea.
I know some folks couldn't make it, but it looks like people are trickling in here. So maybe just give it one more minute. Just closed. All right.
Dave, I was going to ask you, do you have any dates that you know of in the next couple months that you're going to be in the Billings area?
Yeah, you know, I still have the weeks, the next week and the first week of January after the New Year's available. I do have some openings too if we need to adjust, and we can certainly talk about what the goings on around town are so that we can coordinate that, but still have availability. So good there. Doesn't look like anyone's joined in a minute, so we can go ahead and get started if that's all right with all of you.
That's fine
All
with
right.
us.
Cool. All right. Purpose of today's session is to kind of have the stakeholder group get together, go over what this giant thing says, try to condense it and make it legible and understandable for the folks on the line and for anybody watching on the recording. And then we'll kind of do it county by county, which is how the report's set up. We'll go through our site concept prototypes. We'll talk about implementation, and that's next steps, not nest, even though nest was kind of appropriate, but sorry about that. Basically, we want to get out of this, you know, what we get right, what we get wrong, what do we need to continue to look at so that we can submit this thing the way that it should be. So, and the other important part is Steve and I were just talking who we wanted to use this group to ask if I was Carson and I were able to do short presentations to various councils or groups of folks, economic development folks. Who are those people? What's that list, and what are they up to, so we can get the timing right. So what we'll do is we'll go county by county. I'll have Carson recap some of the economic pieces that him and Brian Duffney and the EPS crew did, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the analysis of land use and policy that the CT group did, and then we'll go over the suitability maps, and at the end of each county, I'll stop for discussion to talk about some of the local kind of pieces and talk specifically to each county. So let's start with some takeaways, though. These are sort of the what we learned and what do we need to know going forward. And not a lot of this is going to be a huge surprise, but I do feel like, this is kind of this study really, with the vastness of the region and the vastness of the need, this is kind of your encyclopedia of housing needs and housing conditions in the BRCD region. So this is kind of a 2021, here's what's happening, here's what we learned, and then the implementation piece will help you go forward. There's a lot more to this plan than you see on these slides, these 30 something, 40, whatever slides. But keep that in mind, and understand that this is that encyclopedia of knowledge and how to go forward. So takeaways. These are kind of in order of importance, but not necessarily. But certainly, number one, I think what we've heard is when you look at this region as a 5-county entity, there's a definite need for a regional collaboration entity of some kind. There's people who are doing great work in various parts of the county. Patty up in Yellowstone County, Billings is doing great things. Folks in Red Lodge everywhere are all kind of wanting to solve this issue, that you all have the same massive need, and the reservation's doing things, but there's got to be a way that you can all come together to try to solve these things regionally, because the problems are clearly regional as people get kicked out, priced out, and have to commute further. Let's try to tackle these things regionally, and an entity can be a number of things. It doesn't have to be necessarily formalized in law or anything. It can be sort of a collaborative, and there's some discussion on that. We'll talk about that at the end about how you might go about that. But federal and state law supports forming something like that. So we have Billings, obviously the big city, but a lot of the places we looked at were small cities, and they're small towns, small town character, small buildings, small parcels for the most part, that are served by municipal and districts systems for water and sewer and so on. But the issues that they face are similar to what we see in big cities, big areas, highly populated areas. So there's a lot of challenges with that, because the policy is not typically suited for these kinds of, certainly for the kind of growth that you might see, and for the type of problems that you have with housing there. Single family is the predominant, if you look at across all 5 counties, the predominant housing unit type. Multifamily is kind of what we need to hit that missing middle for those teachers, those law enforcement officers, and so on, but feasibility is just not there. Carson and his team provided some of those numbers, and when you look at it, no matter where you are in this area, you got to do something to help that feasibility kick into the black, so to speak, with your pro formas. Number 4, assist the employers. A lot of the employers that we spoke to, certainly not all, but some of the smaller ones, large ones, I should say, are willing to provide the housing. They just want some help from the local entities. So some of the strategies and implementation actions in this are trying to tailor some of those areas that we have those employers that absolutely need that workforce, that service workforce, maybe some of those tourism-based economies. What can you do to help them get a land underneath a project, or subsidize a project, or make it better for them to do, and do a project that might move the needle in that particular community. Let's use affordable housing as an innovation showcase. A lot of the things that we see, a lot of the comments we've heard already, when we're up in Billings talking about this, is that's all great, but it's never going to happen in Billings, or it's never going to happen in Columbus, or so on. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to do here, is push the envelope with thinking and some of this stuff. So why not use a project as an innovation showcase for innovative materials, innovative site planning. And so we tried to have that come through in some of our concept prototypes that you'll see in a minute. diversify in the short term for long-term health means, you know, a lot of places out there, you have that mix of parcel sizes. There's all kinds of crazy land uses out there. We saw, you know, people are doing micro farms on tiny parcels. We're doing, you know, doing small projects on big parcels and everything in between, but you have that diversity in land and availability of land. So let's make our unit types kind of fit whatever size that you're able to deal with and plug in to that diversity, make sure that we have all the rungs in the ladder for people going, moving into town and being able to stay into town and be able to start a family, those kinds of things. On-site community amenities, what does that mean? That's if we're going to do a project, let's take that opportunity to include something like childcare or include something like classroom space or a technology lab, particularly in the Crow Reservation where we're seeing that's already kind of happening. You have some of those resources in the communities, pair them up with the housing. Let's make sure everything fits together. Let's not miss an opportunity to really leverage a project to get in something that the community needs as a whole anyway. State level support, and that's the tough one, as you all know. There's a lot of things that the state law says that you can't do, and that a lot of other places do. Doesn't mean it's not impossible, but it means you're going to have to go out and champion these things and seek that support, get those laws changed. You know, it sounds crazy and impossible, but it's truly not, and historically other states have done that. And finally, the rate of the housing costs, particularly in Billings and Yellowstone County, is really causing the impacts, not necessarily the costs themselves. It's just everybody trying to keep up, everybody trying to find out how to increase supply, how to boost density, how to get that inventory number up. And which just means it's a really weird time to do a study like this with all the things changing the way they are. But all these things, these are our identified issues. Everything that's in the implementation pieces in the site prototypes is trying to address these in one way or another. Okay, so we'll start going through our counties, starting with Bighorn County. I just have a select number of images up here, and Carson will kind of open up talking about what they saw, and then we'll talk about what we saw. So go ahead, Carson.
Yeah, so Bighorn County, largest county by area in this region. Not a lot of growth over the past decade. Definitely not a lot of in-migration like you're seeing in some of these other counties, like in Yellowstone County or Carbon County. Pretty stagnant economy, just in terms of employment growth and economic drivers. So in that sense, the pressure on the housing market is not so much demand driven as much as it is supply side driven and quality driven, or rather, there's one thing we saw, especially in just the general analysis of like the housing unit stock, is that there's a high share of vacant units, a pretty high share of mobile homes, and the existing supply is pretty old and just isn't fully adequate to meet the needs of the existing population there. So in that sense, it's fairly distinctive from a lot of the other counties in the region, not in terms of being relatively low growth. And definitely presents, unique challenges in its own right related to things like infrastructure and age, which we'll talk about in some of these site plans.
Yep, that's one of the interesting things. It has, I think, Carson, the highest percentage of mobile home housing stock, right? And which probably not a huge surprise, but mobile homes we know are a pretty reliable source of affordable housing for a lot of folks, and that goes from Hardin, all the way through all the reservation communities. I have this piece here, the Two Rivers Industrial Park master plan was done a couple years back. There's been a lot of, the trick here is with all these things is to be opportunistic. And one of the ways that you might be able to do that is leveraging the industrial parks master planning and infrastructure expansion. They did a 10 inch and I think 12 inch loop around the whole community, which opened up a lot of sites next to where that infrastructure went. So being opportunistic, they actually did identify this area really as a multifamily potential. And so you'll see in the land suitability here, when we're looking at land suitability, we include infrastructure and all kinds of layers in our map, but also those plans and those policies that those plans say. So removing some of the storage unit portion of that property, let's leverage what that park is doing. Let's say in this plan that we've recognized the park's infrastructure expansion and accomplishments, and we're on board with that being part of this study as well. It's a big site too. behind every single one of these land suitability maps is a table that is included in the draft. So take a look at that, but it's basically says, you know, what's your unit range? And that's a site right there that you could really move the needle on Hardin's needs to supply workforce. A little bit more about Hardin. These land suitability, I think we have about a dozen or maybe more of these and we'll show them all in this session. But how do we make these? As I mentioned, we looked at land use, infrastructure existing, infrastructure proposed, and institutional properties, city-owned, county-owned properties. Again, being opportunistic, you want to leverage those. Those are critical because those are some of the places that have the highest need, and those are some of the places that are finding it hard to hire folks. When we did our interviews with employers across the board, they can't keep the you know, the prison is here. They can't hire enough people to keep them employed, or they can't find housing that's affordable. So we tried to identify some of those areas. The school district owns these D properties here. And when we look at their master plan, sure, they want to expand there, but at this point in time, we want to identify those properties as an urgent need for potential housing supply. So that's always a great way to leverage those. Some of these smaller ones in here, you look at it from a developer standpoint or a nonprofit developer standpoint, that's going to be kind of hard to make a small property like that work. But there's opportunities maybe to assemble a couple lots next to each other. But our criteria of being close to amenities, close to downtown, walkability was huge. They're still valuable to identify those sites. And then here down here are these mobile homes, which part of the recommendation strategy is to maybe not get rid of them by any means, but rehabilitate them to make sure that they're safe and healthy for folks. Likewise here, the hospital owns this for their helipad. Of course, they need a helipad, but maybe they could put one elsewhere in the future. We're looking 5-10 years down the road here. As far as the reservation communities, this is Crow Agency. You can see our kind of areas of interest here where kids and folks go every day. It's kind of an interesting land use framework because most of the towns across the interstate, there's very little pedestrian infrastructure. So, you know, if you do a big family type housing project up here, which is kind of in the works, as you can see, recommended that you improve the infrastructure to get to these areas of interest in these day-to-day kind of destinations. But looking at the infrastructure, looking at projects planned, this map identifies those particular areas, including school district property up here. So try to think of it holistically like that, kind of as a long range, almost land use type of study, but also looking at it from an infrastructure standpoint as well. As far as lodge grass, this is in one of those properties up here. There's a bit of a hill escarpment. This is where there's an existing tribal housing development. Some might be familiar with it, and that's an opportunity for potential rehabilitation as well. So when we get to our site concept prototypes, you'll see that we're trying not to design a project to a certain site, but make a prototypical application so that one can work in many different sites. And that's particularly applicable in the tribal areas because a lot of that trust land is vacant or available for certain things. But we also noticed that there's speaking with the mayor, there's a kind of a cluster of good areas right here in the town next to that escarpment. I believe that they've cleaned this up and improved the infrastructure. Certainly the recommendation is use this map when you're doing an infrastructure project and improve your infrastructure to this particular area because that has the highest opportunity potential. That's all kind of how this all fits together. All right, takeaways from Bighorn County and the Crow Reservation. It's a 1,500 unit backlog. So that's huge. It's a big problem. So really, we have the immediate need for safe and healthy units. So it all kind of throws the data for a loop when you have that kind of backlog. So you got to get to that supply immediately. But this is the one place where infrastructure needs are the highest. As I'm sure you all know, they're doing the treatment plant that's going to cover 80% of the county by Yellowtail, but can't come fast enough. And there's also 20% of the county that won't serve. But that'll be a huge help. the local, the lodge grass systems in the places that are in water and sewer districts. Hopefully they can tap into that and kind of solve some of these problems, but really resources need to go to infrastructure immediately for whatever that new water system can't cover, and wastewater, of course, as well. So that's it. Rehabilitation is important. Maybe focus on that first rather than putting in a whole bunch of new units. Let's make sure that the community has safe and healthy housing for everybody, and particularly look at some of the older projects and some of the mobile home areas. There is a precedent for innovation here with the Good Earth Lodges in Crow Agency. We kind of tapped into that and did that as a bit of a case study where the tribe brought in some outside experts and used local, almost historically used materials to do a really cool project down there. It's already there. So let's leverage that. Let's keep it going. Let's keep that energy going, whether it's being right next to that project or applying that system somewhere else, and using local workers, tapping into the local community development agencies and bringing in those folks to help with the new stuff and replicating that process. There's a ton of land.
What's that complex called?
It's called the Good Earth Lodges. There's a tribal name for it too. I can't remember. I can't pronounce it. But yeah, they brought in engineering and architecture from University of Colorado, and they leveraged the local workforce to build it. It's a fantastic project, and I think they use compressed earth for their construction type, which hasn't been used for 150 years or more, but it's kind of checks all the boxes for a really cool project in that area. Good Earth Lodges. And then definitely, with that example, that case study, leverage those partnerships, and certainly leverage partnerships and land in the institutions that own these lands. That's going to be huge. I think the need is so high for workers for these institutions that despite expansion needs right now, we need workers and housing. So that's our takeaways from Bighorn County and the reservation. So I'll stop and see if anybody's got any questions, comments, discussion on Bighorn County or the reservation before moving on.
Carson, this is Steve. Did we ever get an answer out of Marion Smith about what they were doing with that rehab grant for $500,000?
No, we didn't.
Let me see, Marianne. Was it on the table, Steve? Were they applying for it? We just don't know if they got it yet.
The funding was approved. Miriam's on that Crow Housing Board. I'm just wondering if we ever heard what they were going to do with the money. I thought that fit into the rehab that you brought up.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I remember now. I remember Marianne was on some of our calls, and they got 18, not 18, some hundreds of thousands of dollars, if I recall, to do rehab, or they got money to do projects, but they were focusing on rehab, but they weren't necessarily limited to just rehab, I think was the case. But that's a good question. I'm making a note to follow up and see what happened with that.
Yeah, we can follow up on that one. Seems like, yeah, pretty pertinent to this.
And ideally, those kinds of grants this study is going to be helpful for securing those in the future, by saying we've done our due diligence. This is what our needs are, which are obviously astronomical. Here's some of the places where we think it could happen. So that's one of the ways hopefully the area can use this study. Anything else on that? Sorry, go ahead. Okay. All right, let's talk Carbon County. Carson, take
Yeah, so moving on to Carbon County, very much a different story than Bighorn County. The story in Carbon County is, the county's been facing a lot of growth pressures, especially in light of, the amenity migration coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the data on home sale prices and home sales by AMI really reflect that. Sale prices have really risen recently. There's been a lot of outside pressure on the market, driving up costs. And at the same time, employment has grown, and employment growth has really outpaced growth in housing supply. And a lot of those jobs are in like tourism related sectors, for example, like lodging or food services or recreation. And the wages at this point in those industries just aren't high enough to afford a lot of the product that enters the market in Carbon County. So it's that when you add on top of that the prevalence of second homes, has the highest concentration of second homes out of any of the other counties in the region, definitely makes for a situation in which the supply of homes available to the workforce is simply not adequate, and definitely needs some kind of intervention and care to ensure that the workforce can stay there and live there for the long run.
And, go ahead,
and I would add one thing we heard just in conversations with people, just because the data on this isn't particularly good, is that there hasn't been a lot of new construction, but even if you want to find a rental property on the internet or on one of the listing pages, it's simply impossible, or just incredibly difficult at the very least, to find something on the market at a given point. Even more so for at a reasonable price point that someone working a standard job there can afford. So that's kind of the anecdotal side of things. Talking to Robin and talking to other people who have been engaging with the rental market there, it's incredibly tight, and that reflects the lack of new product that's come on the market in recent years.
Yep, exactly. And one of the interim solutions is working with the city to do ADU policy that works better for everyone too. That's one of the places where this is probably the ADU marketplace for something like that. And they have them and they use them, but there could be ways to expand on that. Carson, this recent jump in prices, which I'm sure is up here now, is that I think that's the highest between any of our counties, even
Yeah.
Yellowstone.
Yeah. Carbon County definitely has the highest median sale price of any of the other counties in the region. At this point, the most expensive housing market, for sure.
Hard to believe. But, okay, so when we look at land use, land suitability, the story here is that the zoning code has an R4 zone that we think is a pretty good zone to use. You don't need to add a new zone or anything. But the downtown core is obviously lacking of that, and there are opportunities really around the periphery when we did our analysis. The other story is adaptive reuse is a huge opportunity here. Talking with anybody, there's already been projects proposed at the old hospital for a number of reasons. Some may say asbestos, some may say other things that didn't happen, but it still should be on the table. Specifically, if somebody else was looking at it before. And a couple other pieces to note, there's already some, I think the Mountain View apartments up here, I think that's kind of already an affordable project. When you have that energy going, maybe there's opportunities for other ones. These parcels aren't saying let's build out this whole thing with housing. Of course, it's saying you're going to need to probably do a lot split or something, some kind of land use and zoning application to make those areas suitable for some kind of multifamily. But those are really our opportunities for that. Otherwise, the in-town stuff needs to be right sized to the community character. That's what the growth policy says. That's what the zoning says. There's a couple other interesting places like the cannery, which we all know is I think people have been looking at that for a long time. And then there's areas near the school, a couple of areas that have been a little bit underdeveloped because of infrastructure, wet areas, water table, those kinds of things that can be mitigated. But it still tells you that somebody has to help pitch in to support a feasible project in this area. And this is particularly the one where local employers are desperately asking for help and subsidy to get something off the ground. Also a place where 32 unit affordable project could really help things out, even at the smaller scale. Joliet hit our parameters for doing an analysis too. It's getting a little bit of that energy from the Billings proximity. It's been historically difficult to do anything here. In the past, people have kind of gone out in the periphery to try to do big projects, and they've been shot down for one reason or another. Again, we want to apply sound planning practices here, so we're looking at some of the areas just near the institutions along the highway that's still within municipal boundaries. It gets a little difficult down here, but there's portions of these sites that have infrastructure right next to them, and they could be through annexation and some kind of land use development process can be brought into the town potentially and developed on municipal services or district services. So, and a couple of private parcels in between that hit all of our parameters as well. But really, if you think about Joliet, almost anything that happens there is going to be very helpful for hopefully the folks that are on the edge of getting priced out, but really want to stay in town with their families. So, takeaways here. Again, I got the Pea Cannery and Brewery building as my image. It's facilitate adaptive reuse through any kind of financial programs, and make sure that housing could be a part of some of those projects. This one potentially could be mixed use, but and that's great for the community all around. But let's look at adaptive reuse in places like Red Lodge. Let's look for the outside the core for that R4 zoning, which is already there. And there's already parcels in those areas that are zoned correctly and almost ready to go by right for a development project. Let's help employers build it themselves if they're willing, if they have the willingness to go through the processes. Let's help them out with those processes or help them out with subsidies of some kind if the energy is already there. And again, a lot of the policies for growth in Red Lodge in particular, and certainly Joliet, is community character means you can't do something out of hand, even if the zoning might allow it in some cases, which it sort of does. But maybe smaller right-sized projects are better for community character than one 100-unit project on the bench. But it's certainly any opportunity to do something that increases supplies is important. And again, in Red Lodge particularly, not a whole lot of public lands. The city would also need to change its city charter if it wants to convey land at a reasonable market price for affordable projects. Right now, they're currently not allowed to do that at anything below market value. To my knowledge, they're not allowed to convey land for free for a project, so they need to do some changing, which is part of our implementation strategy. All right, Carbon County, Red Lodge. Any discussion points on that?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So we're from the RLACF. Robin isn't here. I do have just wanted to ask, is this going to be available, like sent out after this is over?
Sure, yeah, whatever resources you need today, we can send over. Yep.
It would be great if you could send this over, especially with the land suitability as well. Because Robin was talking with the city and the county about that, and it would be super awesome if we could have that.
Yeah. And if you need anything else as far as the mechanisms behind how those were made and the parameters set, by all means, I can have a talk with you, Robin, or anyone else.
Dave, this is Steve again. Did you guys look at the VRBO impacts on the rental market at all in Red Lodge?
I can answer that. Not directly. That's kind of an undertaking and an analysis into itself. But we definitely know that the stock of those kinds of short-term rentals has been growing, and that the city of Red Lodge has been. I forget exactly what Robin told me at one point what we're talking about to address it, but it's definitely on their policy horizon. And one of the things we put in the policy toolbox as something that the Red Lodge of the county could leverage in the future is implementing some kind of additional fee on short-term rentals to raise money for housing, because in Red Lodge, as in so many communities across the Mountain West, it's definitely a growing issue, especially in light of the housing shortages that exist. So it's a good point, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I do want to add on to that. So we actually purchased a subscription to Market DNA to look at that. And just within city limits of Red Lodge, there was 151 active units. And those are, most of them are single family homes. Some of them were single room rentals, but a good majority of them were single family homes.
That's really interesting. And did you look also at some of the other places in Montana that we're seeing impacts from short-term rentals is wedding, and Red Lodge is a huge wedding destination. So what we're seeing is people are going up on Remington Ranch on the benches and renting out huge houses, which is getting people to enough income to go elsewhere, and they'll just have their houses as a wedding, bachelorette party or something place, right? So is that also, that was our anecdotal assumption, but is that the case as well?
It's really just a mix of a bunch of things. It's out-of-state buyers will just buy houses and then just rent them out year round. 40% of those homes were rented out between 181 to 365 days of the year.
Yep.
Interestingly too, there isn't a dead season anymore, or a shoulder season where, there used to be times where it made more sense, there is less tourist income coming in, but we see across the board in each industry, there is less of a slow period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think it all kind of piles up, so to speak, but the increasing supply at a smaller size could be a huge priority. And that comes back again to ADUs. If you have a really good ADU policy that brings in the ones that are there and make sure that new ones are compatible with the historic character and so on, there's got to be another policy that says we don't want these to be soaked up by short-term rentals. So but to your points though, ADUs probably are less desirable short-term rental than something bigger probably anyway. So but that's a great opportunity there.
We did just have a policy change for ADUs in zones R1 through R3. So that they're no longer they're allowed on those properties now. But there's no deed restriction for they can't be a short-term rental. There's nothing to back that up. It's just
yeah, check in on that at some point. That'd be interesting to see how that policy works in a couple of years. Cool. Okay. Stillwater County. Carson, give us the upshot on the economics.
Yeah. So, one of the most central economic drivers in Stillwater County is the mine. It has about 1,800 full-time employees and about 1,000 additional contractors that work there. And that employment has really shot up in recent years. At the same time, the housing stock really hasn't kept up with that surge in employment. And a lot of those jobs are pretty well paying, right? So the employment base is of pretty well paying jobs. The core issue is that the availability of homes in Columbus or Abersoke or wherever else in the county just isn't quite there to the extent that the demand for them is there. And the sale prices really reflect that market pressure. They've shot up over the past few years. And one of the things we learned in conversations with the mine is that they have a pretty extensive bus system that such that a lot of the employees at the mine don't actually live in the county. Some amount of those employees might want to live in the county, but or might not want to live in the county. Some might. So I think, by and large, one of the larger takeaways was that it's a fairly high growth county, anchored by the mining industry. A challenge with that, and a challenge with adapting long-term policy to that kind of industry is that mining does fluctuate. The output and the success of a mine fluctuate with commodity prices and commodity demand. So as a long-term consideration, that has to be taken into account. But nonetheless, the bottom line is that the growth in employment in Stillwater County has put a lot of pressure on the housing stock, and we see that trend continuing in coming years.
Yep, certainly caught in the crosshairs. So, and Stephanie, we haven't spoken in a couple months, but I'm sure something else crazy has been going on since we last talked. But so we looked at Absaroka in Columbus, but I'm kind of curious as to this little dip here. It's kind of interesting. That is, but let's take a look at what the land suitability brought up. We don't want to look at Absaroka because they've got the districts out there that they're improving as far as water and sewer. But really, we looked at new units in the last 5 years. It didn't appear that there was a lot, but when we saw, look at the footprint of some of the parcels and some of the things happening nearby, it appears that Absaroka could be certainly a target for growth. So not a whole lot of available land. Might be some portions of A here, trying to stick within the district boundaries and be near the school. A lot of it's private. This, of course, is the school district, the old sandstone school, which has been looked at, but it fit the parameters as an opportunity. A couple other places in between. There's some other good spots kind of around here, but access was a huge issue, and these are sort of the ones that might be most applicable for the reasons listed in the draft report. As far as Columbus is very interesting. There's plenty of land, as you can see, kind of out the leftover pieces out here in the periphery, with a couple really interesting pieces here. This is identified in the growth policy, I believe, as a kind of a mixed use or maybe commercial opportunity. It's a big enough site to where you could organize land uses on that site to make it maybe horizontally mixed use and support some multifamily there. And then you have all these places right near the edge where infrastructure is kind of right there, but it would require land use development, approvals of some kind. You have this piece here right next to one of the older, I think is it senior or an affordable project here, lends itself to some good access, good infrastructure access. A couple of pieces downtown, but really this is the interesting one, I think, for us, is when we saw that this parcel is owned by the Billings Stillwater Clinic, and this is the school district's parcel. So again, opportunity for collaboration with those two entities to help them help the community increase supply in those particular areas. This is one of the newer subdivisions, nothing super new, but when you look at logical growth patterns, you kind of look at this area, which I think people are thinking about, and you look here where the street grid could get extended, and you have that institutional land ownership that you could partner with. Quick takeaways, as you can see, lots of opportunities, but there's a lack of diversity. The community character is single family with a couple of limited multifamily pieces. So how do we increase that diversity of housing unit type, housing unit size, while still thinking about what the demand is about, which is that single family home for folks that might work in buildings or for the mine. They've got families. We don't want them to necessarily leave and commute further away. We want to keep them in the community, or attract people who lived in Billings, who work at the mine, or somewhere else, that didn't have an opportunity for a home. Maybe this is an opportunity to do attached single family at a certain density that hasn't been done before. So there needs to be a catalyst, and that catalyst is gonna require a change in thinking. That's part of the purpose, I think, of the study is to reinvigorate some of these ideas of what kind of unit types are possible. Maybe the construction communities is going to have trouble providing those, but certainly there's ways. Once you get that one catalyst in there, you could have a great opportunity to hit some pretty good numbers as far as workforce housing and missing middle housing. One of those ways, one of those opportunities is to apply the community land trust model that has worked in Red Lodge and Bozeman and Missoula and elsewhere, to try to balance out and get that supply increase. So this seems like a really good market, really good community to maybe do that. We'll talk about that in a second, but certainly the single family for 3 to 4 dwelling units an acre is probably not going to move the needle enough. So we got to figure out a way to add density through smaller lots, smaller units. Okay, Stillwater County. Discussions, surprises, questions, comments. Let's go right into Sweetgrass. Carson.
Yeah, so Sweetgrass County in the western portion of this region, relative to some of the other counties, like relative to Stillwater, relative to Carbon, a relatively low level of growth over the past decade. Not a lot of new population or employment. Has the lowest population density of any of these counties, and then because of that relatively small job base and population base, the housing market is pretty small as well. Only 26 homes were sold in 2020. At a median price of about $350,000, which is fairly expensive, but definitely not the highest in the region. And one of the interesting things that we heard in conversations with people about Sweetgrass is that, despite the fact that it hasn't grown rapidly over the past decade, it's gradually experiencing more and more growth pressures because big timber, other parts of the west, other western parts of the county along I-90 are within the Bozeman commute shed. And as you all know, the housing market in Bozeman has become extremely expensive, and I'm sure has led a lot of residents there to move out and commute in. And that's a potential source of pressure on the market in the future. And one of the big things that's reflected in some of our recommendations is ensuring that the county is planning for that growth effectively. And given that a relatively small amount of housing has been built in the past several years, it's critical that county policy or the county gets creative and effectively ensuring that any growth that occurs from that Bozeman commute shed in the future is met.
Yep. So big timber was our land use, land suitability analysis for the county. It's interesting. It was really interesting looking at Columbus versus big timber. A lot of similarities, certainly in form and function of the place, the services that these communities provide for the countywide area and for the rural residents, and some of the land suitable sites are kind of reflective of Columbus's as well. But there's a couple interesting pieces here that there's 2 kind of transportation corridors that lend themselves to good access for housing. One of the things is housing and supportive services for seniors. I think we heard is needed, tremendously and probably everywhere, but big timber specifically. There's some existing medical center and existing affordable apartments right down here. So you kind of have this synergy of things going on right down here. So that's kind of why some of these sites came in. Couple might require some annexation, but for the most part, they're all within the municipal boundaries. And there are some zoning issues for some of these that would require rezoning, but when you add up all the layers together, they do fit the parameters for suitable sites here. And a couple of sites in the downtown core that would be in other places that we've seen once the values get to where they need to be to develop in 5-10 years, they could be great infill residential sites or mixed use sites, potentially small mixed use sites. I know they look really tiny, but they're actually, they're about 150 foot by 140 foot. So you might be able to make that work if you can get the land underneath it for subsidized somehow. Just wanted to bring in this example for every one of these sites. We documented some of the existing conditions as well. I didn't pull this in for every single one, but just wanted to show some of the other analysis. That's the old hotel. I love that old hotel, but this would be parking that would probably need to be replaced or somehow made available elsewhere. But you can just kind of get the idea of how great it would be to have a core area housing project with 10 to 12 units in that area. Quick takeaway, it's caught in the crosshairs, as Carson mentioned. You're commutable to Billings and Bozeman, Livingston potentially. That I would want to do that, but some people are, as we know, because of the economics. So I think this one's really, the story is about potential. You are seeing some growth, not that much, some sales, maybe not as much as elsewhere, but this is one that's really the potential is there. So interestingly, high vacancy rate in the, I think this is really countywide, but also kind of exposed that maybe this area is one of those big second home markets with those houses being vacant. I think it's almost a third of them are listed as vacant. So maybe folks are using those as short-term rentals as well, or just second homes, third homes. There's infrastructure tools that might be applicable here, not just water and sewer, but other things like site development that might be useful to help get a project out of the ground. And then multifamily with this, this particular site or other sites, that small compact multifamily development might start to make a lot of sense when you look at costs, site development costs and potential if subsidized or made feasible in some way or another. And then there's the access to transportation, highways that people want. And there's plenty of opportunities near them, but they might do some zone changes. Again, this is just the upshot. There's a lot more. Anything else on Sweetgrass that questions, comments, discussion? All right. Yellowstone County. Go ahead, Carson.
All right, yeah, saving the biggest one for last. Yeah, so Yellowstone County historically is a fairly low price market, but that's changed a bit over the past several years. With growth pressure, with new employment growth, with population growth, it's put a lot of pressure on the housing market, and as you can see, sale prices have been steadily rising over the past 5 or so years, and at the same time, incomes have generally not kept up with housing prices to the extent that makes housing continually affordable. As you can see in that one chart, incomes have been relatively stagnant in a lot of major occupations. So thinking about that in very concrete terms, while the housing market in Yellowstone is still lower priced compared to other areas of the region, the jobs there don't always pay adequate wages to afford what exists. There's definitely been a fair amount of new construction, both single family and multifamily, like Josephine Crossing, also some of the apartment projects out on the west side have brought new stock online. But it's definitely a situation also in which that development of missing middle housing is really critical, and ensuring that the housing that actually gets built is built at a price point people can afford, and doesn't just conform to a particular type of large lot single family home that predominates a lot of the market. And Dave will talk about a couple of the prototypes that he and his team have come up with on that front.
Yep, and this is just to keep in mind, obviously Billings is the huge part of it. So we did treat Billings a little differently based on what we were scoped to do, but we also had to understand what was happening in the rest of the county. So when you look at the suitability mapping, this one was really, really heavily dependent on local interviews with stakeholders and planners and everybody. Because if you look at the whole city, a lot of our parameters that we use for the other communities, it would light this thing up. But we all know that that's, we have to use something a little bit differently for Billings. So this is the lay of the land, so to speak. So what we identified, or what was identified through the analysis, were places where infrastructure is going to get expanded, places where the growth policy said growth should occur, an existing framework for affordable housing and for land banking and things like that. So first of all, we've got the inner belt loop location that's going to come up to the heights. We know that there's some things that need to happen before that kind of really gets off the ground, as far as a land use target, a future growth target for land use and housing. But certainly we know that once that goes in, it's going to be a little bit more valuable than it is now, and it's going to be a place where potentially you can leverage some of that new infrastructure to do bigger projects that you might see on the west end that you might be able to do in that particular area once services and commercial uses go up there as well. And certainly the growth policy does identify Highway 3 as an area for housing, again, 5-10 years down the road. We picked a sort of a prototype spot here on the west end for what you'll see as one of our site prototypes. We know it's growing, it's got infrastructure. And one of the ideas we want to do there is kind of push the envelope about what might be applicable for a typical multifamily project there, while keeping cost reasonable to have a number of units that's actually going to supply the workforce. The eBird, the urban renewal districts are a huge part of the Billings, I think, conversation, as we all know. Maybe it's not quite there yet with some of the increment for tax increment financing, but certainly can't let that opportunity go in a study like this, and recognizes it. We'll talk a little bit more about C for our site prototypes, but there are a couple other spots, your ENF in that area, where we've heard, you can't take away parking lots in Billings. We know that maybe through long-term parking demand management and other ways we can get to that conversation, but we just heard too much that housing is more urgent at this point for the workforce and for affordable units. So, and then a couple others. We have the Downtown Billings Association, I think, has a parcel that they've been thinking about for a long time when we spoke to them. And then the South 27th corridor, which these are part of the Community Development Land Trust program that makes a lot of sense to us. Obviously, wanted to look beyond the core and beyond the peripheral at some of the Lockwood parcels, because as we spoke with the Housing Authority, Lockwood's really a place now. They got the new school, they got a lot going. So we wanted to make sure we identified a couple sites there, and find a unit mix or unit type that might work for those areas, which I think you might find interesting here in a second. We looked at Laurel. Laurel was really hoping to find something in the core area similar to Big Timber. There are actually a couple of really nice developments occurring here. These townhome style row homes, which again, if people are looking at it for those units, it kind of creates a synergy around that. Might be ability to put a couple parcels together for affordable housing in some of these areas. But certainly out here in the area by the elementary school, and these are mostly, I think these are all private parcels, but they're big enough to get something going that's not just a single family home on a quarter-acre lot. And then these areas here, which are sort of emerging as well. Again, parcel sizes are suitable for something bigger. And then there's been a couple of the interested in a couple other spots on the other side of the train tracks here, which would contribute a little bit to walkability to the grocery store and other places.
Dave, this is Becky and Helena. My partner and I are building in Laurel. I think it's 32 units. It's across the street from the library, which I think is just south of your letter A. I'm not 100% sure. And then up higher, north of the West Elementary are 62 units that are 40 to 50 years old, called Spruce Grove,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all being renovated. And
Fantastic.
both of
Yeah.
these are affordable housing with income restrictions.
100% restricted. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great. That's a story. That's great. I mean, Laurel, we know it's their plans strongly support supplying housing. They've got their TIF district. They've got the energy. So I think when we were doing research, hopefully we pulled those off because we knew that they were kind of happening. But what stage is the library project in at the moment?
We own the land, and we'll probably break ground in 2 or 3 months.
Are you doing, is that the parcel here where you're annexing potentially as well? Or is it further?
No,
Okay.
no, we're inside the city limits. I'm just guessing that property just south of A is the library, but I could be wrong.
Might be.
I do know that Spruce Grove is definitely north of that elementary school. Let me see. Yeah.
Here.
Okay. And then pull it up a little. Make it go up. It's definitely on 8th Avenue.
Okay. I think, yeah, it might be these ones right here.
Nope, it's
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 further
an
down.
empty lot. It's
Okay.
an empty lot.
Cool. Well, good. That's great to hear. All right, quick takeaways before talking about some other stuff. When we look at the land use, we look at the zoning, we look at how things are done, it appears to be good. It's in place. We just need to be opportunistic, whether it's with site acquisition or with using TIF districts or other things for funding and for catalysts. We heard loud and clear all the challenges that Billings faces at the housing summit, but we also heard a lot of optimism that people are willing to get things going. So it's a matter of finding out where those little niches are that we can use to get a catalyst project going. And I think once one really solid project gets going, no matter where it's at, and there already are tons of projects, as we know, there's a lot of market rate projects in the West End, hundreds, 700s units. But getting those 100% affordable projects or even partially affordable projects in areas is the trick. We also heard from a lot of the builders and developers that everybody's trying to do smaller lots, smaller unit sizes to boost density and to boost supply. There are a couple things maybe that would make that easier from a policy standpoint, but we've learned the zoning is not the thing that's prohibiting that. And the planners are quick to point that out and point out why that is. They have the neighborhood mixed use zone, which was kind of in massage from other things to make an opportunistic zone to do the higher density smaller lots. And I think it's starting to catch on. And if anybody else knows if it's been used in the last couple of months to try to get multifamily going, even for market rate, then let us know. But it's a good zone. It's got the good design standards, site standards for what we're looking for. And then don't just focus on the core. Look at some of these areas like Lockwood that have the energy and have the need and have that family demographic and other pieces, have that workforce demographic there to put a project in. Look beyond just the conventional areas. We're going to talk about site prototypes next, but discussion, questions, comments on Billings Yellowstone. I do want to say that I think I'll let Carson speak to what we're doing as far as expanding on some of the numbers from the downtown study, but that is in the works too, I believe.
Yeah, we're still coordinating that, Steve. We need to coordinate exactly with Diane when we can meet. We can probably meet this week at some point. But yeah, we'll be updating the work we did in 2017.
Cool.
Dave, this is Steve again. So a couple things I haven't heard today is city counties as partners in development on affordable and workforce housing. I'd like to know if there's some capture of that in the study. We've been looking at some of those city and county parks as I visited with you guys about.
Mhm.
And we think that there's some opportunity. I know Patty Webster at Homefront's working on the park, those undeveloped parks that have been sitting there for 40 plus years that are never going to be developed. And my other takeaway, I guess, that I wanted to ask about is we haven't had a mobile home park approved in Yellowstone County for 40 years. And while that may not be the most attractive form of housing, it does get people into that workforce housing, at least gives them a stepping stone, that rung on the ladder comment that you opened with.
Mhm. Yeah, yep. Both of both of those things are addressed in the next two pieces, which are site concepts. I want to get through them quickly. There's a lot to them, but we did actually with Patty in that Lockwood site. We tried to reimagine the mobile home park, and so we can get right into it right now. But we'll you'll see kind of what she said that was needed, what we know is out there, and what we know about modular stuff. We all agree that there's an opportunity for potentially a new one, but not mobile home parks are not what they used to be, right? So we can do them so much better now, and I hope that when we get there in a second, that it kind of addresses some of those things while creating the next generation of mobile home parks through modular duplex type housing. So and then to the parks, yep, finding these unconventional sites is part of our implementation strategies. So, work with multiple departments, just try to find those weird spots that nobody really thought about before, and including the parks and including park or city owned property, and including the lots next to parks. Even when we looked at the land use, there were a couple that were kind of right around them, that maybe if you took part of that park and then part of the other piece next to it, you could really do something interesting, and again, move the needle on affordable housing projects. So let's kick into that here. If there's any other questions on Yellowstone Billings, I think you'll be interested to see some of these things. Okay, so when we were doing prototypes, we were tasked with doing 6 of them, and we looked for sites and projects, parcels, areas that were repeatedly found. So it's what we call them prototypes, because it's a condition that we find across the county, across Billings, or between Big Timber and Columbus, it might be applicable. Between Crow Agency and Lodge Grass might be applicable. So these are what we called them. And we'll go into them, since I don't want to use too much time without getting you through these, but we established guiding design principles with all of these. And you can kind of read through these, kind of what I just said: multiple conditions, the highest mix of unit types, smart growth from inside the community to out, and extending streets and services, as realistic as financially possible, knowing what we know. So that means, maybe surface parking is a better way to do it than undergrounding it, but all those kind of trade-offs we considered. Optimized density to match character. So in some places, huge buildings not appropriate or desired. So what kind of other unit types can we do to match the character? We wanted it to be well designed, look nice, and then compatible with local conditions, and to the extent possible, meet projected housing needs, which kind of goes right back to this: optimizing density. It's always as much as possible within reason, within character, within cost limitations, and to the extent possible, be compliant with local codes. But also, if something didn't really comply perfectly, then we didn't want that to stop the ability for a project to be listed here as a prototype. So these are the cut sheets for these prototypes. I'll kind of point out some of the important things of each. This one we call urban renewal. It's applicable to Billings, Billings city block sizes, Billings city streets, and areas sort of near the industrial urban renewal area. This is in fact a real site. It's the Empire Steel site. And we picked this because in the past, developers, affordable housing developers have targeted for housing and for dense housing and mixed use. So we explored some of the ways that might be possible through using TIF financing and using a market rate anchor or a mix of market and affordable to supply the density needed. So when you look at unit types, these are walk-up kind of condominium. That means there's no interior elevators necessarily, but you can walk up to them and potentially, as you can see here, they're semi subterranean garage. So that would be feasible for the market rate piece, for the condominium piece, and then the other ones would be mostly surface parking or alley loaded garages tuck under for these pieces, surface parking to save on development costs. So we tried to apply some character images to these. These are, I think most of these are found either in Montana, elsewhere in Montana, Missoula, or other places. So people have built these. This one in particular is on the Greenway. So that's a huge opportunity to potentially orient your buildings to that Greenway, and even use opportunities of the Greenway as amenities for both community and for project, and maximize green space everywhere we can, and make sure it's very well connected throughout. Also in this, you'll find a kind of implementation, stepwise implementation strategy flow, and then an idea of what funding sources have been used for similar projects that might be able to be used on this, and a couple of concept summary notes here. And these are, trying to make all the things that we just talked about real, right? So we want to make sure that this is not just conceptual, and it is a concept, but it's also based in reality. Total unit is 216 for this particular example. There also is an opportunity on this one to keep the old commercial industrial building and do some kind of adaptive reuse of that, or do mixed use. But when we looked at the numbers, it's number of surface parking orientation. This is the way to get the most optimal kind of mix of everything that we want to get out of these things. So I will kind of go through these and then make sure I have enough time at the end to talk about all these and implementation, if that's okay with everybody. This is downtown block. So this is a typical railroad town, 300-foot block by 140-foot with alley access. So this condition is found in Hardin, South 27th and Billings, and if you're able to put a couple parcels together in Laurel as well. So again, we're thinking big here with green infrastructure, streetscaping. This is an urban kind of feel. So this is about the footprint of the building that you'd need and be able to park it on the surface and tuck under to save costs instead of going completely underground. You can see some examples of what that sort of looks like here. You can get about 32, maybe up to potentially 40 units in something like this. We wanted to make sure that we pointed out it's mixed use, but that the best use for these shaded areas would be if it was potentially developed by a nonprofit. It would be something like a services for the community or community amenity, or some kind of locally serving use, and there's about 3,000 to 4,000 square foot of indoor space for those uses, or for community space. And so wanted to make sure that that kind of physical understanding was conveyed in this concept as well. And all these are parked realistically as well. So we based on the local zoning, except for really this one in Billings, which you need to get some kind of relaxation of the zoning. But from what we heard from folks, they'd be willing to consider some of those things. It's also in Billings, Yellowstone County. This is that west end condition, but on a major commercial corridor. Really, we tried to replicate kind of what we saw in South 27th with some of the projects down there that walk up 3 to 4 story. I can't remember the name of the project right now, but There might be ways to sort of do that half tuck under parking, surface parking, and then alley loaded garages to get to that number. This one's got about 88 walk up, 32 townhomes, trying to get that unit mix for about 120 total on a fairly small site. So trying to crank that efficiency out of the site and save costs without doing underground. This is the we call it country townhome village. It's trying to be that rural scale townhome, but really apply to that community land trust model that we see working elsewhere. So the idea is that you'd have a market rate anchor, potentially two-story detached garages, 2 to 3 stories elsewhere, plenty of amenity space and potential indoor community space. And then you could leverage that market rate to do the community land trust model of permanently affordable townhomes, which I think we're seeing elsewhere, making sure that they're not pushed to the side, that everybody's getting an equal quality site, home, access as the market or land trust model. And this is one that takes up about 8 or 9 acres. This is on the east end in Columbus. It's trying to convey smart growth, extending roads, maintaining that street grid while getting parcel sizes enough to support the unit counts that we need, bringing pedestrians to the outside and then bringing vehicles to the interior of the site. Just have a nice, good site design and make sure that these things are scaled appropriately to the nearby modular single family homes over here. This is at about, I think it's about 16 units an acre. The homes here are at about 3 or 4 units an acre. So it is kind of a push in density for the community, which would have to be certainly mitigated and through, hopefully design. We can scale these things on the neighborhood side to be appropriate, but still want to get that density needed to make it feasible and to provide the housing that we need. So neighborhood, rural, townhome, community land trust, all that in one. And so Steve, this is the one that I was speaking of about kind of the upgrade to the old mobile home idea. So we try to really push this together. We know that some of these modular units are attached duplex side by sides, and some of them they can be detached to kind of spread things out, but also gain construction efficiencies. Wanted to introduce a tiny home concept because I think that was on some Patty's and some other folks' minds. But really, this is kind of a neighborhood, good access, good open space, safe interior place for everybody to, place for kids to play, potential playground, and didn't want to miss an opportunity to have that on-site amenity. This is an example of an indoor modular community space that includes, I think, a daycare in particular in this one, and is also attached to firehouse on the other side. So we know that they're out there. We can do it. This one gets to about 68, 70 units on a fairly compact site, even though it is more of that neighborhood scale. So trying to improve upon the previous models of modular home, mobile home parks by making it actually a community and neighborhood with neighborhood amenities. Finally, I think this is finally, this is on the reservation using a lot of research that we did and a lot of case study work that we did, and trying to improve. Again, all these are trying to improve upon what we saw. So this is a modular type of development with single family and potentially duplex units down here. Now we use the circle kind of motif throughout because learning from the Good Earth Lodges and Crow Agency we were talking about, it's definitely something that we've seen in other projects that are on the reservation, respecting the tradition, culture, and ancient kind of design techniques that they've used. This is one that is kind of on that Crow Agency site, I believe, but it should be, we kind of trying to treat it as a case study where you could stamp it in other places and repeat it to the extent that you get to the housing supply that you need. So we have a ready site. This is just one way that we think we can improve upon the plan by including community gardens and having each kind of shared family open space. Okay, those are the case studies. Again, those are prototypes, not meant to be a development plan by any means. Trying to be a useful tool to get folks excited, to get people to understand what it would take to get those kinds of unit counts out of these areas. So, quick questions on those before talking quickly about implementation. Okay, our implementation tables outline how to do all the things that the report says needs to be done. So each on the far left here is the recommendation. It might be an action, it might be a policy change, but each one has associated actions with it and associated list of partners. Just a couple to point out, there's a lot of these, we've broken them out by region-wide things that that can be done, kind of big things, big picture things, and then each county has a somewhat customized list of recommendations and actions that and ways to get to the end result here. So this is kind of where you take it from here. So this one right here, take a regional approach to housing, is what we started out with. We need a regional collaborative thing, whether it's called a consortium, whether it's called a regional housing collaborative. That's something that with this group and others would be valuable to discuss and see what everybody thinks. Now, I do want to point out it's not all under the guise of BRCD to do all these things by any means. This is supposed to be kind of that regional partnership piece. So what BRCD could do is establish a list of who might be interested in this thing. And we've got some considerations here. There might be others, but the entities themselves would have to be partners in this. The idea is to schedule and hold regular meetings, discuss the issues that each individual community faces, each county faces, and then talk about solutions and see if there's ways to get efficiencies by having that regional approach. Directing members to funding sources, and then interact with state legislators. Again, one of our early takeaways was you lobby the state, do the things that you need to do at the state. If you come in with a regional group, it seems like historically that's worked a little bit better than coming in just alone and specific for housing.
The Montana Housing Coalition has legislation every single year. And it made quite a bit of progress in the last session. We're going to bring it back this year. We have paid lobbyists there on our behalf, and it's our biggest single push is to double the amount of tax credits available. Right now, we can with the federal money, we can fund 6 or 7 projects a year. And we're asking the state to match that money out of the Coal Trust interest. And we only lost it by a very tiny margin this last round. So we're kind of hopeful for the next one.
Yep. Yeah, we were following that. Yeah, the Montana Housing Coalition seems more and more like there might be some strong connection and resources to what this kind of thing is. The BRCD region is so interesting because the fight between Eastern and Western Montana has always been there, massively different in character. BRCD is kind of right in the middle. So I think that's why it's so important to form this kind of in the middle partnership with folks to talk about these things. So you're not East, you're not West. It's kind of something very unique. So it's important, and I'm sure everybody, Becky, appreciates you fighting the good fight out there.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Before we go, I've got a question for Becky, I guess, in regard to, I had read recently that the state left $960 some million on the table for the low income housing tax credits. How can we get the state to access those funds? What's going on there? Is that a legislative thing we need to put in the action plan?
They just had a follow-up meeting. Let's see, when was it? was not too long ago, and I think I think they allocated it. They have another, it's never totally left on the table. The worst case scenario is it's carried over to the next year. And the other thing that happens to it is if a project is experiences a shortfall for valid reasons, they can go back and ask for a little bit more. But I think it got allocated. I will follow up and make sure of that and find out exactly what happened. Steve, that's a good question. Yeah, and that was the Board of Housing decision about low-income housing tax credits. Thank you,
Thanks. I
Steve.
think
I'll
that would
follow up
add,
on that.
it would add over 700 units statewide to the affordable mix, which is something we really need to be
Mhm.
working on.
Oh, well, it would add how many? 700?
Yeah, I think I read 700 in that article.
Mm,
Well, then I don't think I'm talking about the right amount of money. Now, we got I'm not coming up with the name of it, but they had us, those governor appointed commissions to excuse me, to spend the federal emergency money. So that a huge like $20 million got allocated to housing projects and designated that the projects were chosen in that process. If you look up in the legislature, emergency commissions, federal money, it'll pop up. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of the correct name. So maybe, I don't know, Steve, help me know what you're talking about so I can help look.
Okay, I'll talk to you offline here.
Okay, yeah, let's figure that out.
yeah, yep. Likewise, we want to make sure that if it's on the table that we get it into our implementation and other things. So I'll make a note to follow up with both of you. Check on that. So yeah, we're cruising through, almost out of time. I want to make sure that we hit on a couple things. Is there anything else that kind of did we get it right? Are we missing anything except for the downtown study numbers, which we're working on? But does that all make sense? Are there any surprises? And then my second question was, who else should we engage with to do quick kind of presentations and discussions in the region?
Dave, this is Stephanie from Stillwater. So I really enjoyed, I don't think there were any surprises from my end as far as just kind of understanding the need and watching the affordability indexes get further and further apart between housing and employment. And we have had some activity in Stillwater where we've recently had a developer out of Bozeman purchase property in Columbus for a potential planned unit development. I think the thing I enjoyed the most about this was really your prototype site concepts, because while we all kind of get the data, and the data is going to be good to push forward to our elected officials and like our other stakeholders that we want to meet with, being able to actually see something and talk about density and what density might look like in these rural communities, I think is really beneficial, because we tend to be single family focused rural communities, right? And everybody gets really afraid about the density issue, but when you can see it laid out, and that kind of concept, I think, is very valuable. So thank you for that portion of it. I think that's my biggest takeaway, is I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Cool, great, thanks. Yeah, we love doing them because it gets rooted in realistic conditions and hopefully does exactly what you just said. So.
Yeah, this is Joel. I just wanted to say thanks for your presentation today. I think you guys did a tremendous job on this, and there's a lot of data points there. And like Stephanie said, there's a lot of things there that I kind of knew, but there was a lot of things that I thought were interesting to look at in the future. As far as who to invite, I think we talked about potentially doing another Zoom for our region, our rural region, on this in January.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll provide this to our board members and stakeholders and any interested parties that's this that was recorded today so they can do a little homework before the presentation, theoretically.
Yep.
And
Okay.
then they'll have the ability to do Q&A, hopefully. I think Steve has some other groups in Yellowstone County in particular that he'd like to get you guys in front of
Yep.
at some point.
Totally. Yeah. And if we're out of time, Steve, we can talk, and anybody else about what those are. I think BRCD has kind of decided there might be a handful of kind of quick hitting virtual meetings, but also potentially that in-person session in Billings to the city or whoever else might be available. But let's talk and just get a hold of me.
Okay.
All right. Any other closing thoughts?
Dave.
Yep.
I just wanted, I'm gonna put my email in the chat, but Robin is out of the office right now. And we're working on our housing needs survey to go into our housing needs assessment. So I'd really love to take a quick look at this again before I release the survey to the county.
Totally. Yep. Please do that. And I'll try to get everybody else in the call a copy of the slides as well. Let's see here. Looks like I got it. All right. Thank you, Eric. Well, appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for the time. This is kind of, the first of our rollout to the rural areas and other areas. So let me know what you need. Get a hold of me. Send me an email, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thanks, Dave and Carson. Great job today.
Thank you so much, guys.
Ciao.
Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, Steve, what was that? Did I miss something?
And I wanted to thank you and Carson for that.
Oh.
We're looking at either the 5th or 6th of January for maybe the small group. We've got a working group of 44 that have been coming together on a monthly basis. And then we've got a group that came out of that housing summit that's meeting weekly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're meeting again tomorrow, so I'll be able to pin a day down. Billings City Council moved us back to February 22nd. You know, we typically have about 10 minutes max.
Yeah.
So I think if we've got access to the recording though, that would be beneficial, and we'll circulate that around if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. And for our next sessions are going to kind of be rural, and then maybe there's one that's urban that is more focused on Billings, Yellowstone, that we can have before then as well. I'm hoping that's the idea.
We are looking at a follow-up to the housing summit. I think June 22nd was the day we kind of penciled in, not to compete with the State Department of Commerce's. They typically do a housing forum as well the week before.
Gotcha.
But you know, I've been telling everybody this is a snapshot in time. It's impossible to keep up with all the counties and relevant information, but it gives you a snapshot anyway of where we are.
Yep. Right. It's crazy how we don't know what things are going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with Steve, and we talked about that previously, but since there was really nothing comprehensive that had been done in our region to address the issue, and it was something we kept hearing about from each county, I think this will be great for at least a benchmark and a place to start.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think the way that you've scoped it and put it together is really unique and pretty cool for the state and for the region. So awesome.
Dave, we've got a call next Wednesday with Cheryl Cohen, who's the new housing director for Department of Commerce. And if there's some talking points that, you know, that's why I was following up with you and Becky on that. If there's some things that we need to start initiating,
Yep.
There's not an interim housing legislative committee, for example, that started, but a group of legislators are working on this, but there's no dedicated task force to this. So we're just trying to figure out what kind of talking points we need to get in front of the legislators in the interim session.
I think we've got some stuff that we could help with. So yeah, what would it be a good deliverable for you on that? At least, could we have some recommendations at the state level for legislation. We could provide you with those. If you don't have a copy of the report yet, we could certainly provide that.
Yeah, that'd be great, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, on my list. Copy of state recommendations. Okay. And implementation. All right. Well, we're certainly available, Carson and I. So thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night.
You too.